Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO, and I'm really pleased to be here today with composer Michael Gordon to discuss his travel guide to Nicaragua, which intersects with some of the work we do at YIVO about Jewish history and Jewish culture. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to talk with you and to be here, and hi to all our YIVO friends.
So your piece starts out with a quote of Lekh, lekha from the Bible. What does this mean to you, and why did you frame the piece with this?
Well, the piece is Travel Guide to Nicaragua. It's basically the story of how my family got from a little town in Poland called Jatslawa, or Jęczol in Polish, or Jedel in Yiddish, to Managua, where I spent the first 8 years of my life. It's a bit of a complicated story with different streams of information coming from various sources, and that's part of the part of the feeling of the piece, that you don't know exactly what is going on or what really happened. I was speaking with my father, who came over, left Poland when he was 24 years old, and so obviously he spoke Yiddish as well as Polish and Russian, and then had to learn English and then Spanish. I was speaking with him one day, and he actually quoted that line from Lekh, lekha in Hebrew to me. Go out from your land, from your people, from your father's house. And then he turned to me and he said, "That's the story of my life." And he, had went from Poland to the United States to the Philippines, where he fought during World War II. He spent 4 years in the Philippines. He came back. He went to Nicaragua, and then back to the U.S., and then spent some glorious years in New Jersey as a chicken farmer, and met my mother, and they went back to Managua, and then to Miami. So it was quite a journey, I think, and I think into different cultures. And I'll always remember that moment. I actually didn't know that he even knew a line or a word from the Torah, and much less in Hebrew. So I was impressed, and I was like, "Dad, how do you?" He said, "Well, I went to Cheder in Poland, and so I learned some stuff."
And the story, it doesn't just talk about your dad. Can you tell us, maybe you can give us a quick rundown of what you cover in this piece and kind of the scope of it?
Well, there's several streams. One is the three different leavings from Poland. My grandfather, who, depending on the story that you follow, abandoned my grandmother and her three children, or came back from World War I, where he fought in the Russian army and had been gassed and was crazy, or committed some kind of crime from which he had to run away from or escape. Or or another thread, honestly left Poland and went to Cuba with the thought of, making money and bringing the rest of his family over. My grandmother, who a couple of years later took her children, two of her three children, and went to Cuba to reunite with my grandfather, or chased after him, or but made the big decision, the momentous decision, to leave one of her children in Poland. And that child was my father, who was 12 years old, and was that was 1927, and he didn't leave until March 1939. So and so he finally left and came to the United States, reunited with his mother and his sister and brother, and then was soon drafted, and spent 4 years in the Philippines with the U.S. Army. So the various streams out of Poland. My grandfather from Cuba left again to Nicaragua. My grandmother, finally, I guess she gave up and smuggled into the United States with her two children, made her way to Boston. probably not that strange a journey for people in that time period or people trying to get out of Eastern Europe. And it's one of the reasons I just identify almost everyone in the piece by, they're a father or my father's father or sister, brother, so forth. Because it's a kind of, there's a kind of certain part of this that it's a story that you hear a lot. It's not just my story, but it happens to be my story also.
Yeah, that really speaks to this interesting idea that why this is not just family lore, because this is an amazing, fascinating story that could just be kind of passed around amongst the family and told to friends. But actually, this has a much deeper resonance. This is the story of a generation. It's the story of a people, and the biblical frame helps set that up as well.
When you tell your story, I think when you tell your own story, I think it's very easy to see that it's also, it's a shared story. As you say, it's not only the same story other people have, but it's the story that as Jewish people we've undergone several times now.
Mm.
So
So one of the great details in the piece is the shoebox. So could you tell us a little bit about the shoebox?
my father had a shoebox, which in this piece has a central role. He kept photos in there, and there were some World War II medals he kept in there, and a few documents. And the shoebox just sat in his closet basically, and once in a while, I say once in a while, every few years, 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, I would say, Dad, let's look in the shoebox, and it's, oh no, just there's nothing in there. Right? There's nothing to look at. In fact, it's just the pictures he brought with him from Poland, and those are pictures that those were pictures of a life that didn't exist anymore, in a place that didn't exist anymore. And once or twice, I could get him to look at the pictures, but he would just freeze up and he would just say, all gone, all these people are gone. That's about as much as I could get out of him. I didn't think too much about it. I mean, my father, he kept that shoebox there, and he really kind of closed off that experience and went on with his life. And he had had a very sunny disposition, actually, and I think he had a very very positive life with my mother. And but that was just not that. I think they were able to do that just by closing that world off, and I think that, for me, I never really thought about it very much. I just thought, well, my father was really lucky. He left Poland in March 1939, and they closed the borders that summer. And the Nazis came into Poland in September, and that was that. But when I started to think about it, I started to think, well, I guess my father, in a certain way, was also a Holocaust survivor, and in the sense that the life he knew, the people he knew, his friends and family, they were all killed, and you can't go back there. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine, oh, all my friends are gone, the town I lived in, it's all this, and that's such a huge thing to deal with. And he dealt with it so gracefully. He dealt with it by shutting it off, but he dealt with it in a way that made his life work well.
And the shoebox is such a moving metaphor for that. I mean, it's both literally the thing that he did, but it's also a metaphor for this compartmentalization of the past and kind of putting it off in the corner, putting it under your bed.
Yes. That's right. I like that.
It's very interesting how in the text of the piece, all of these different strands, as you said, they kind of live side by side. And one of the other strands is that you feature poetry by this poet,
Rubén Darío.
which is a very interesting thread. That's another layer of the piece.
You know, it's kind of an amazing thing that Nicaragua Nicaraguans love poets and poetry. Poets are like rock stars in Nicaragua. It's a very unusual thing, and one of the reasons is because the first and greatest imprint that they've made on the cultural map is this late 19th century, early 20th century poet, Rubén Darío, who was a major figure in the world of Spanish poetry. So much so that, for example, he's on the currency. He's on the currency regardless of whether it's the right-wing dictatorship or the left-wing dictatorship, right? He's revered
Pretty amazing
everywhere.
for a poet
Pretty
to be
amazing,
on
right?
your national currency.
Right. The main buildings all over Nicaragua are named after him. His hometown is like a national, not only a monument, but a place people go. And as a child, I mean, I left when I was 8, but I knew who Rubén Darío was, right? And as a child, every single kid in every single grade every year had to learn a poem by Rubén Darío from memory, right? I love the idea that a country is thinking of themselves, or at least in my interpretation, of being on the map not because we fought this war, or we had this great politician, or we are the home of Google or whatever, but because we had a great poet. It's just an amazing thing. So I refer, there are 2 sections that touch on Rubén Darío. One is this childhood memory of learning a poem, and I set part of the poem, which is one of his most famous poems, and also very very childlike in its fantasy of this young princess who goes up to heaven to visit the king's palace, or so forth. And later I said a stanza of another poem, which is more serious, and it's in a certain sense reflective of the journey and the feeling throughout this piece.
One of the things I think is really interesting is how you've got the kind of things that that are really striking about all these different stories that you're weaving together. And then you have also the things that you don't know. And in a way, what you don't know is a big part of this piece. I mean, in the sense that that mystery kind of looms over it. I don't know. I wonder how you think about that.
I hate to say, I'm a fan of Holocaust literature. I mean, that sounds kind of sad, right, and dark, but or people telling the story of their Jewish families, and I'm in awe of someone like Daniel Mendelsohn. He wrote a book called The Lost, where he traces back these family stories. He goes to Eastern Europe and looks for the threads so he can answer these questions. And it's so painstakingly slow and meticulous that that it becomes glorious. This search for well, what really happened, and who were these people, and there's so many people looking back and saying, well, what is my story? And I kind of, I just kind of became fascinated with the haziness of it. It was very strange. I had a little, kind of family gathering a few weeks ago, and I heard a new story, and it was another, oh, well, this is why, Goldie left one of her children in Poland. I had never heard it before, so the way this information in a very short time, really, and with access to the people who were involved, gets fragmented and dispersed. Uh, so I felt I was really fascinated by that. I was less interested in finding out, well, what really happened and who was there and what really is the story than the fact that there were so many variations in such a short time, and I guess being a composer, I'm interested in variations. So.
And the title travel guide, could you speak about that? Because, when you hear travel guide, you think, oh, this is going to tell me the sites that I want to see when I'm visiting
Yeah.
Nicaragua, and your piece does
Yeah.
something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you think about the title?
The truth is that when I started the piece, it was really going to be more about Nicaragua and about my childhood there. I thought, oh, I grew up in Nicaragua. I'm going to write a piece about Nicaragua, and I actually wrote that piece, and then I woke up one day, the premiere was at the end of March 2020, and about 10 days before, for reasons we all now know, it was postponed, and it was kind of postponed until who knows when. And that was fine. And I woke up one day and I was like, I got it wrong. This piece isn't about Nicaragua. I've really missed something here. And the thing that kind of really really shook me was that I was in Israel for 5 weeks in 1985. And on the very last day I was there, completely by chance, I met a woman who was from my father's town. And when she realized, I was with my wife, Julie, and when she realized I would, that she knew my relatives, right? She was like, oh, you have to come with me. And Julie and I went to her house and spent a time there with her and her husband. And she was 16 years old in August 1942, when the Nazis basically rounded everyone up, all the Jewish people in the town, and they marched them to the cemetery, and they just started shooting. And she started running, and she got away. She ran into the woods, and in the woods, she was able to connect with the partisans, and her husband had also been in the woods and was in part of the partisans, and that's how she met him. And that's how she spent the war, in the woods. And when at the end of the time I spent with her, she handed me this book, this Yiskor book, which there are many of, where people, in a sense, who survived towns that were annihilated during the Holocaust, write about their town. I was like, I have to tell this story, and I have to tell the story. I have to tell this story, and I have to let people know that in the background of this whole journey out of there, that in the background of my childhood was this ghost, which we know of as the Holocaust, but in terms of my father, that was, the destruction of the life he knew. And I rewrote the text then, and I realized, no, it's not really about me or my life in Nicaragua, which seemed not that important. That the essence of the story was really, that this was a certain kind of the certain kind of background for Jewish people growing up at that time with parents who had, experienced this, and that it was possible. I felt, wow, I felt fortunate that, I had contact with this person. This was a person who knew my family and was from my father's town and was there. And she can't tell that story anymore, so now it's my responsibility to tell that story. And that's how the piece evolves. So
Yeah,
you're right,
that's fascinating.
travel guide to Nicaragua it has to be taken as a travel guide to a different kind of there are a
It's a,
few words missing there. Travel
it's
guide to
a, it's a travel guide to the Nicaragua of your imagination and of your experience, and it's a very interesting way to evoke this idea that there's a lot to a place. It's not just what happens there, but it's also what drives people there and what is in people's imagination when they're there. And that's you've opened up a world into your family's Nicaragua in particular.
yes, partly.
So this is your second piece with The Crossing, and Donald Nally, and Maya Weiser, the wonderful cellist, is also a soloist. Um, what's it like working with The Crossing?
Well, as a composer, as a musician, I hope you get the opportunity as a composer to composer. I hope you get the opportunity to do this because
Thanks, Michael.
you write beautiful vocal music, Alex, and I think you would appreciate these singers. I don't think I don't think I would ever have thought 20 or 30 years ago, oh, I'm going to write for chorus. It conjures up a different type of world or sound that I'm interested in. But I think that singing has changed, and the way singers sing, and the way and when we think about singing, right, there are polars, right? We think about classical music, so we think about opera or art song, right? And we think about this voice that many find very beautiful, that is a learned discipline, almost like kabuki theater or classical Indian dance or something, but it's something that is not natural. And then at the same time, we hear a very natural sound almost constantly in popular music, where many singers, some singers are trained, but many singers are singing just with the voice, their raw voice, right? They just sound good, and they sing very directly. And I think that for people who have been brought up in the classical music tradition, but have wanted to work with voices that sound direct and can communicate more directly, it's been frustrating. And so the development over the last couple of decades of singers who are doing that, singing with a pure sound and singing more directly, is really an inspiration, and it's a really nice time to be writing for voices. So to have a whole a chorus, to have 24 singers that that really can produce a very intimate, direct sound is very special.
And your other work for them was also autobiographical in nature. I wonder if there's something to that, and you're thinking about vocal music right now.
Well, I started, there's a wonderful group here in New York City called the Young People's Chorus of New York City, and their director is this wonderful conductor, Francisco Nunez, and I've been working with them on and off for more than 10 years. I love writing for young singers. And when I first wrote for them, he called me and said, Michael, most of the people who write music for my chorus set poetry. And, you know, these kids, they don't relate to poetry.
If only they were raised in Nicaragua, it might be
If,
different.
if only they were raised in Nicaragua. So he said, can you find something else to use as a text? And over the past, I think, 10, 12, 15 years, I've written about 5 or 6 pieces for them. I've written the texts. They've all been about New York City. The first piece I wrote was called Every Stop on the F Train, and I just set the names of every stop on the F train, starting in Brooklyn, in Queens, and ending in Brooklyn. And the kids loved it because they were like, oh yeah, that's my stop, or, you know, I switched trains here, and, you know, so forth. And then I started just writing little pieces about New York City. I have one of the pieces I really like is this piece called Great Trees of New York City, which is actually, I got all the information from nyc.gov. The Parks Department has gone around and identified these trees, you know, that are spectacular for one reason or another. You know, they're 300 years old, or they're 150 feet tall, or George Washington stood by this tree, or something like that. So when I started to write this piece for The Crossing, I just continued. I just thought, well, I'm just going to continue writing text, and, you know, I might as well just write about the block I live on. And that was the beginning of Anonymous Man. So so I slowly kind of prepped to write these memoir type pieces, or these pieces of, you know, where I'm writing the text about something that's just happened, you know, or happening to me, or going on around me, or going on around in the city.
I almost laughed when you said that you didn't see yourself writing choral music or vocal music, because at this point you've written so much incredible vocal music and choral music and opera and songs. So you know, it's wonderful that we have it, and we're all looking forward to hearing this. So Carnegie Hall, November 17th, 7:30 p.m. Zankel. See you there.
Alex, looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.